In the not-too-distant future, Britain is filled with torture cells, unfair punishments, prejudice against minorities. However, in the midst of all this chaos, one man known only as V dares to stand up against the government and is labeled as a terrorist. One night, V rescues a mild young woman called Evie Hammond. An unlikely bond between two emerges, with results of Evie becoming V's ally. But although V may be charismatic and have a passion for justice, he's also bitter in his own personal hatred of the government for something they did to him long ago. As November the 5th, the day V says he and those who will follow him will stand up to the government once and for all approaches. Detective Finch becomes more and more determined to uncover the truth about V. However, his search leads him to ask questions whether or not he is on the right side.
The two articles we have chosen to use that have concepts that relate to the film are The Visceral Politics of V for Vendetta on Political Effect in Cinema, written by Brian L. Lott, and Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema by Laura Mulvey. The three major concepts that we are going to discuss are a dominant patriarchal society in films, the threat of women to a patriarchal society, and post 9/11 fears in George Bush's administration.
Mulvaney talks about in her article how there's a dominant male perspective in films. So in V for Vendetta, there's the government who's in place is strictly male, and there's a dominant view of them. So it kind of gives the idea of a patriarchal society. Patriarchal cinematic practices typically position female characters as objects of desire and frames their desires from the vantage point of male characters and/or patriarchal ideologies. Patriarchy as a belief system in which the family and political system is structured with the belief that men and/or male desires are more valid than other value systems. Chancellor Sutler is the representation of patriarchal dominance in the film. So he represents a dominant view of male patriarchy society that kind of suppresses all other minorities, including women. Mulvaney also talks about how women are a potential threat to patriarchal society. In the film, Evie is this potential threat towards the patriarchal society. So after she allies with V, she becomes kind of the female. She kind of represents female revolt against the patriarchal society. In the film, Evie is eventually captured and imprisoned by the government. This represents the idea that women should be controlled and need to be controlled by the patriarchal society that they live in. The film was made in a post 9/11 era, so this next scene also references this post 9/11 world. So in particular, there's a relationship between the black bag that is placed over Evie's head while she is being imprisoned. This could be seen as a direct reference towards the Abu Ghraib prison abuse and torture scandal that took place at Guantanamo Bay during the Bush administration.
Many critics agreed that V for Vendetta is an allegory for life in George W. Bush's America, as well as a critique of his administration and policies surrounding the war on terror. In the first half of the film, the general emotion conveyed is one of repression and fear, which is expressed through the narrative and the use of aesthetics. This is comparable to how George Bush was somewhat oppressive in his administration, and how he wanted to increase executive powers, its use of torture, surveillance, and restriction of some basic civil liberties. In the film, V for Vendetta urges viewers not to get their rights trampled and gives the viewer a sense of empowerment that they can make a difference in their own government. Evie has this moment after her torture with V, when she doesn't give in to her captor's demands for information on V's whereabouts, she is freed from herself. And once she is freed, she realizes that V is her captor, and she is at first upset, but then realizes that she is free from fear, and as a result, is no longer afraid of her own government. At this point, she is reborn on the rooftop in the rain, which is juxtaposed with V's rebirth by fire many years ago. It is during this scene that the viewer also realizes that sacrificing your freedom because of your country is also a form of imprisonment. This correlates directly to the Patriot Act enacted by the Bush administration, where your civil liberties could be lessened for national security purposes.
The film also explains the idea of risk society, and a definition of risk society is a society increasingly preoccupied with the future and with also the safety, which generates the notion of risk. So the film takes place in the future, and it's kind of preoccupied with the idea of safety, risk, and generates the idea of fear in society.